This is Climate on the Edge, where we explore the frontier of climate interventions and dive into the bold ideas that could shape our planet's future. And I'm Susan Sue.
Fundamentally, what we do at Applied Carbon is we produce biochar from agricultural residue. And those are things like corn stover, wheat straw, material that normally just decomposes in the field. And what we do that's really unique is our technology. It actually produces the biochar in the field, much like a combine harvester. So we're able to produce it much more scalably and at much lower cost than alternative approaches.
Hey everyone. I recently attended the Carbon Removal Capital Summit, a joint production between Xprize and the major global bank Santander. It was an awesome opportunity to get to flag down some pioneering Xprize finalists and hear more about their work. In this interview, I speak with Jason Aramburu, co-founder and CEO of Applied Carbon. Applied Carbon, which recently transitioned from their former name, Climate Robotics, is developing a scalable, decentralized method for turning crop residues into sequestered carbon in the form of biochar. More and more carbon removal companies these days are focused on delivering multi-layered benefits and building revenue resilience into their carbon removal credits business by selling other stuff. Applied Carbon helps the same people, farmers, who supply their input biomass in a full circle approach. I enjoyed this chat with Jason about why biochar, which is already leading all other carbon removal methods in both sales and deliveries globally, is still very much at the bleeding edge of carbon removal. Jason's a serial entrepreneur who's also been a VC, and I appreciated his unique perspective on how scientific and technological breakthroughs continue to shape markets. I hope you enjoy this chat with Jason Aramburu, co-founder and CEO of Applied Carbon. Please say your name, your role, and your company.
I'm Jason Aramburu. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Applied Carbon, formerly Climate Robotics.
So Jason, first things first, I'm attached to Climate Robotics. What was behind the name change and how has that been going?
So we changed our name from Climate Robotics to Applied Carbon for a couple of reasons. One, there is another company in the agricultural robotics space with a very similar name and that is also making tractor-mounted robotic agricultural equipment. And we kept getting confused and we really wanted something that defines what we're doing. And fundamentally, what we're doing is applying carbon to soil. We are applying biomass, or we're applying biochar to the soil and doing it in a way to increase crop yield and fight climate change. So we felt that Applied Carbon really much better encompassed what we're doing and our vision as a company.
So my next question was going to be describe what you do in one line, but I guess I might as well have just asked you, what is the name of your company?
Fundamentally, what we do at Applied Carbon is we produce biochar from agricultural residue. And those are things like corn stover, wheat straw, material that normally just decomposes in the field. And what we do that's really unique is our technology. It actually produces the biochar in the field, much like a combine harvester. So we're able to produce it much more scalably and at much lower cost than alternative approaches.
So Jason, I want to ask you about something. To me, the whole CDR problem, the carbon removal problem, is at its very essence fundamentally a waste management problem. And for anybody that knows anything about waste management, we actually also know that waste logistics is a huge part of the cost structure and just a big pain point overall. How does Applied Carbon handle or address the problem of the waste logistics component of waste management?
So right now, nearly all biochar that's produced in North America is made in large centralized biomass energy facilities and then trucked out to farms for application. And my co-founder and I, after working over 15 years in the biochar industry, we realized that the trucking companies were getting rich off of this, but everybody else was struggling to make the economics work. And we realized that to make the economics work, you have to minimize transportation and logistics of your feedstock and your biochar. And the key to that is in-field mobile production. In agriculture, we use mobile equipment to harvest, to plant, to seed, and we feel that the same approach is needed for biochar production.
I spoke to a waste founder at one point. She told me a really great saying that in the waste industry, everybody knows that you make money from moving garbage around, not from putting it in the ground, which is like a very cynical yet true description in that particular, but it applies here as well. And I think very few people have thought about the fact of who is actually benefiting from the growth of biochar.
Absolutely, yeah. The biochar industry, traditional industry, over 50% of the cost is just logistics, moving feedstock around, moving biochar out to the farm and out to the field. So the trucking companies were getting rich, but it really wasn't helping to build the industry and the ecosystem as a whole. And so we take the approach of there's feedstock available on the farm. There's also a need for biochar on the farm. Let's just produce it out there.
And all that trucking certainly eats into your carbon negativity.
Absolutely. Once you start having to truck these bulky materials around, it really affects your LCA and you have to account for all those emissions. And they can be quite significant because the reality is the production plants for biochar are not necessarily located where the farms are.
Define LCA for us.
LCA is your life cycle analysis. So basically looking at your process and determining how much carbon your process sequesters and then how much it emits as well.
What specific problem within carbon removal does applied carbon address? And how does it overcome the existing limitations? You talked a little bit about the logistics component. What else should we know about applied carbon?
At Applied Carbon, we're overcoming the cost fundamentally of carbon removal. Carbon removal is still, as an industry, very expensive and very early. Biochar is unique in that it's probably the most thoroughly studied and vetted carbon removal technologies. What we're doing at Applied Carbon is really bringing down the cost of carbon removal to a point that we believe is scalable and manageable. So we're bringing it below $100 a ton by optimizing and automating the process of biochar production. As a byproduct of what we're doing, we're also helping farmers. So we believe that uh, in this at this point in time, it's really important for CDR carbon removal to have ancillary benefits as well, monetizable benefits. And biochar is very unique in that regard because it also improves soil health and crop yields in a way that can be monetized.
Okay, so if I could sum that up, you are pursuing two of my favorite trends in tech in general, but also within carbon removal. One of them being decentralization, and the second, which is multi stream value. Jason, you were already doing biochar before this. You mentioned for 15 years. What motivated you to pursue this particular, or was like your aha moment, and what gave you the passion to pursue this particular approach?
So, yeah, I've been working in biochar for quite some time. And I had always wanted to bring biochar technology from small farms to large scale commercial farming, commercial row crop agriculture. And no one has really done that. And it, there was an aha moment for me. I was actually really fortunate about 10 years ago, 5 or 10 years ago, to have a conversation with the late Dr. James Lovelock, the creator of the Gaia hypothesis, and actually one of the first people to popularize biochar as carbon removal technology. And I said, hey, how biochar is being used on these small organic farms, these niche wineries, but how do we get it into a corn farm in Iowa, a 10,000 acre corn farm? And he said, you have to think about how nature would do it. And nature would approach this as a grazer, like a livestock, a cow, moving slowly through the field, chewing up material, converting it into biochar. And I said, that makes a lot of sense. And that really inspired what we're creating at Applied Carbon. We're building agricultural equipment that moves through the field much like a grazer and converts this waste product into biochar in a single pass.
I love that. I love that there's this real emphasis on kind of an agriculture 2.0 approach where if we think about ag 1.0 or like scaled ag 1.0 is like the green revolution, working against nature, applying these very synthetic techniques to be able to get yield and kind of juice the numbers, so to speak. And now we're realizing that there's actually a ceiling on that. And we're now exploring how can we work with the trends that exist already in the natural world.
Absolutely. And biochar really encompasses that mindset because it's an ancient technology. It was developed originally by indigenous farmers in the Amazon thousands of years ago. And this ancient wisdom can be applied today to modern farming. And we've seen that commercial farming, chemical fertilizers, absolutely, they've dramatically increased yields. They've fed the world, but there are also consequences to them. We are finding that chemical fertilizers have led to soil degradation. So farmers get caught in this vicious cycle of every year they're having to use more and more fertilizer and more inputs because the soil is actually losing its ability to retain nutrients and retain water. And biochar is something that can actually help to break that cycle. It can increase the soil's ability, the health of the soil, its ability to retain nutrients and retain water, and ultimately allow farmers to use fewer chemical inputs.
What would you say is your guys' biggest bottleneck right now? Is it technical? Is it capital? Is it logistics? Is it culture?
I think for us now, the biggest bottleneck is going is really scaling up. So we have developed a design for our system that works, that's field vetted, tested, and that is ready to scale up. And now we're thinking about how can we build hundreds or thousands of these pyrolyzers? How can we spin up a production plant? And how can we leverage the same financing mechanisms and USDA support that companies like John Deere have access to, for instance? So we're starting to think through how do we go from an early stage startup producing these units in-house to really scaled production of agricultural equipment.
Great place to be as well. It's a real
Yeah,
privilege to
yeah,
actually be at that point.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's see. Oh, here's a question I have for you. So, given your vantage point within carbon removal, within biochar and also beyond it, what do you think is the true edge of CDR today? And if you had a crystal ball, what kind of big breakthrough in carbon removal do you think we can possibly expect on the 10 to 15-year time horizon?
So right now, I think within CDR, the technologies that can really get to $100 a ton or less have a significant edge because I think that is ultimately a price that's palatable to the global economy because somebody's going to have to pay to scale up carbon removal. And so I think cost is really important. And in terms of what breakthroughs could come to market in the space, I think what will massively open up the opportunity or open up the sector is once the barriers to verifying, issuing, and selling credits come down. So once that process becomes incredibly automated and simple to the point where, say, an individual farmer or someone, an individual farmer or someone developing a small carbon project can monetize their credits without a significant cost input, I think that's when the industry really hits an inflection point.
Yeah, it's hard enough for VC backed companies to figure out the financial engineering piece, right? Let alone for some of the stakeholders that you're working with. That was actually something we were talking about with Omar from Vaulted, which is just like he had mentioned he had underestimated the complexity of the actual carbon credits business and how that's really its own standalone
Mhm.
thing to figure out. And now you bring that down to an individual kind of landowner, farmer. Like, where do you even begin with that? What do you think are some of the innovations that we might see there?
So for us at Applied Carbon, our dream, our vision is that an individual farmer or a contractor or service provider in the agriculture industry can buy or lease one of our machines and verify, market, and issue the carbon credits themselves and monetize them themselves. And the industry's not there yet. An individual farmer or producer likely wouldn't have the ability or expertise to do that. But I think it will ultimately get to that level. It needs to get to that level. I think tools that can streamline the process, can streamline the accounting and measurement are going to be really critical. Also, just awareness and consensus, et cetera, increasing. But I think there's a lot of applications for software and automation and sensors to make the process much easier to verify and issue these credits.
Okay, so I have a little bit of a wonky follow-up question to that. Do you believe then that measurement, reporting, and verification, MRV, should be vertically integrated into or embedded directly into the technologies that they're measuring, reporting on, and verifying?
I think it definitely depends on the CDR technology. That vertical integration may not be practical for all technologies, but for something like biochar production, it absolutely is. So for us, we're already embedding the sensors into our pyrolyzer that we need, then that third parties need to verify our production and verify our credits. I think for many CDR technologies where it's applicable, yeah, that is important. Absolutely.
There's this interesting tension between we are producing the technology and the solution, therefore we know the best and we are the most familiar with the specifics of how it needs to be measured versus we're also like the check on ourselves, right?
Yeah, obviously, you don't want people grading their own homework, so to speak. That's important. I think that's where it just really depends on the specific technology because something like biochar is relatively easy to measure, I would say. If you can validate that your char was produced under certain conditions, and that's pretty easy to prove, and you can validate that you actually applied it to the soil, it's hard to deny that there's a carbon removal there and it's fairly easy to measure. I think other technologies, it becomes they're a lot more complex to actually measure the removal. So that's part of the reason I'm so bullish on biochar. I think it's fairly mature in that regard. So I think it really depends on the technology, but I think everybody in the space has the best, ultimately, everybody in the space wants to maximize how much carbon they're removing from the atmosphere. And yeah, I don't know. I think it'll be interesting to see how the space evolves.
So biochar is currently the most dominant form of carbon removal globally. What are the challenges that you face as an upstart within the most, no matter what, it's all still an upstart industry, but you are an upstart within the most dominant kind of vertical versus if you were, say, on a really totally pioneering technology track?
I think one of the interesting things about biochar is, yeah, since it's today the dominant pathway or methodology, many people perceive that it's a mature technological industry. But once you actually look at the space, you realize that's completely false. The over 95%, probably 99% of the biochar that's produced in North America today is made in existing bioenergy plants. So it's a byproduct of biomass energy production. So that's fine for all of the research work that's been done on biochar for the last 2 decades. But to scale this into an actual industry where we're producing millions or billions of tons, we really do need purpose-built pyrolysis systems, and those actually don't exist. When you look into the industry, you realize that it is still quite early, and there is still a massive white space in the industry, IP white space, to build scalable, low-cost pyrolysis systems. So it's very exciting in that regard, and I think we're starting to see that. We're starting to see third parties take notice of that. There was a study that just came out showing the biochar machinery market is poised to grow dramatically over the next 4 years because today there really is no biochar machinery market. It's still very early.
All right. I have two last questions.
Mhm.
One, which is, what is a personal experience or moment that made you passionate about carbon removal?
I think for me, one of the main reasons I'm so passionate about carbon removal, it's actually my kids. So I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. I have 2 girls, and I believe very firmly in the concept of leave no trace, leaving the world or your campsite or your environment better than when you found it. And I want to leave the world for them better than when I found it. And that's something fundamental and really important to me. And I believe carbon removal is the best way that I can contribute to that.
Yeah, I think on a more philosophical level, there's really something spiritually unique about cleaning up other people's trash. And there's almost like a meditation in it. Like this is getting very, I don't even know if we'll include this part, but it's we want to teach our kids to leave the place better, but not just after ourselves,
Right.
but for everybody, because we have to do somebody else's share in addition to our
Absolutely.
own share, which is just a mind blowing concept of how hard that is.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it's something when I take my kids out into the woods or we go camping, I tell them if you see a piece of trash on the trail, You pick it up and you pack it out and throw it away. And that's a hard concept to teach to them. They're like, wait, I thought we weren't supposed to touch garbage. And I say, okay, this is different. This is different. So yeah, but it's important. It's important. If we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it.
Yeah, I love that extreme ownership. Okay, last question for you. Amidst all of this, it can be really heavy to work in climate tech, to work in carbon removal. There's a lot of barriers. There's just also a lot of stuff going the opposite direction of where we're trying to go. What gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope in carbon removal and biochar is that we've really seen it has, call it bipartisan appeal, because there is a lot of political division in this country right now. And climate is one of those issues that's still pretty divisive, unfortunately. And what I have seen is that pretty much everybody on the political spectrum gets behind supporting farmers and helping farmers to grow more food, because agricultural production in the US is fundamentally a national security issue. If we don't produce enough food, we're in a very difficult spot. And I think both sides of the aisle recognize that. And that gives me hope. To be honest, some of the biggest supporters of biochar on the political side are folks from the conservative side. So that to me is really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jason. It was great. Thanks for listening to Climate on the Edge. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the show and consider dropping us a 5-star rating and review. You can also follow us on social media so you never miss an update. Climate on the Edge is brought to you by Emergence, innovative minds exploring climate's next frontier. Thanks again for tuning in. See you next time.